Hello, I'm Andrea Lipinski.
And I'm Keith DeCandido. Do not adjust your sets. We control the vertical. We control the horizontal. We control this episode of The Chronic Rift.
Tonight, we're giving the comic art commentary portion of our program a little more room by discussing one of Marvel Comics' most enduring and endearing characters, Spider-Man.
But first, we'd like to bring back a feature that we debuted last year, round about this time. It's the holiday season is nearing, and we'd like to give you some suggestions for holiday gifts for that FNSF or comics fan that you just don't know what to get. First up, we have some nonfiction selections. Yes.
The Starfleet Technical Manual and Terminator 2 Judgment Day movie book.
The movie book is put out by Applause Books, one of our neat sponsors. And the technical manual gives you all sorts of bizarre details about the Enterprise that you may need if you want to write a novel or something. And also, it's just fun stuff.
Like how to get a tribble out of your chicken soup?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I don't know if it has that, but if it doesn't, it should. Maybe that'll be the next edition.
Exactly, okay.
Right. Anyway.
In the fiction category, thank you. We have Beauty by Sherry S. Tepper and Xenocide by Orson Scott Card.
Two fantastic books. Really good books. You should go out and buy them right now, even if you don't want to get them for a present.
And he likes them too.
Yes.
We also have several audio gifts picked out. The Star Trek 25th Anniversary Audio Collection and Frankenstein by Mary Shelley as narrated by Julie Harris.
The Star Trek one has 3 of the giant Star Trek novels. Enterprise: The First Adventure by Vonda McIntyre, the Final Frontier by Diane Carey, and Strangers in the Sky by Margaret Wonder Bonanno. They're read by George Takei, who's really good, and James Doohan, who's really bad. Next.
You mean Kirk and Spock didn't go in for this?
Nimoy did some supplemental readings, but basically it's Takei and Doohan.
Oh, okay. Then we have some video gifts. One of the extreme coolest,
yes.
Which is very good.
Yes.
Godzilla Meets Bambi and other weird cartoons. And also Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Excellent! Next.
Oh, man.
What more can you say about it? It sums it all up.
Yeah, it's better than the second one.
That's certainly
That's what we can say about it.
Yes, much better than the second one.
Also in the, now in the comic book category, we have Mouse, A Survivor's Tale 2, and Here My Troubles Began.
I reviewed a couple weeks ago on The Rift. It's a great book, fantastic book.
That's why it's on the list, silly.
Yes.
Also, we have Twisted Sisters, a collection of bad girl art.
This is wonderful. Some really sick stuff. The Twisted Sisters title is appropriate. This is very twisted stuff.
For Christmas?
Yeah. Not for the week of heart.
Okay.
And last,
we have suggestions for magazine subscriptions. We have Locust and also the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, the latter of which I subscribe to, so it has to be good.
the former of which I subscribe to. Well, sort of. The show actually subscribes to it. But Locust has news and reviews. FNSF has also reviews and fiction. So all sorts of neat stuff. Anyway.
So now, it's up for that part of our show where we turn the show over to Keith for better or for worse. Go on,
Richer for poor, all that other stuff. This is Comic Art Commentary. David Mazzucchelli is the latest cartoonist to go from mainstream success to forming his own company. He has formed Rubber Blanket Press. Mazzucchelli became first known as an artist on Daredevil, first working with Denny O'Neil, then with Frank Miller. He also worked with Miller on Batman Year One. The first title from this press is Rubber Blanket, an anthology by Mazzucchelli and Richmond Lewis, his wife, who is an artist who did the coloring on Year One. This should be available at your local comic shop. If it's not available at your local comic shop, Mazzucchelli says to pester the shop until they order it. Mazzucchelli is also an invited guest to the Angoulême Comics Fair. This is in France. It is the biggest comics fair in the world. Every year they have a featured country, and this year it's the United States. Among the invitees, and none of these people are guaranteed to show up, but they've been invited, are Sergio Aragones, Carl Barks, Linda Barry, Chester Brown, Paul Chadwick, Julie Doucette, Will Eisner, Mary Fleener, Drew Friedman, the Hernandez brothers, Ben Katcher, Jack Kirby, Joe Kubert, Gary Larson, Jim Lee, Mazzucchelli, Charles Schultz, and Art Spiegelman. Not all these people are guaranteed to show up, as I said, but even the ones that do show up will make one hell of a guest list. This week's comic in review is Captain Confederacy, written by Will Shetterly, colored by Will Shetterly, and art by Vince Stone. This was originally a 12-issue series from Steel Dragon Press, a small press that is owned by Shetterly and his wife, and FNSF author Emma Bull. It's a superhero story set in the present, an alternate present, in which the South won the Civil War. And what we know now as the United States is over half a dozen little independent nations. It focuses on the Confederate States of America and their very own superhero, Captain Confederacy. This new series is done in color from Epic Comics, Marvel's imprint. The premise of the new Epic Limited series, it's 4 issues, is to gather all of the world's superheroes together in free Louisiana. As well as, there's also a plot going on among certain intelligence agents to reunite the United States. The appeal of both series is twofold. For one thing, the world. This kind of history rewriting is always nifty. And Shetterly includes a whole bunch of changes, both political, the outcome of World War II is much different and World War II never happened, and personal. For example, blues great Robert Johnson is still alive. And the letters page is full of speculation, and some people have called the letters page the best part of the book. Shetterly also has an excellent ear for relaxed dialogue. He's on a par with Dave Sim and Peter David for conversational humor. Steel Dragon series is in black and white. The Epic series is in color. And like the color version of Mark Schultz's Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, the coloring process isn't very good. It's much too bright, too many glaring colors. Also, Stone's thick and rough line art is much better suited to black and white than it is to color. It's tough to follow the story if you don't know the Steel Dragon series, but it's still a very thought-provoking book. In one letters page, Shetterly urges everybody to write Epic and demand that they reprint the 12-issue series, so you should go ahead and do that. Captain Confederacy is a 4-issue limited series published by Epic Comics, 28 pages an issue, $1.95 an issue. All 4 issues should be out by now, and it is available at your local comic shop, along with Rubber Blanket. That's it for Comic Art Commentary this week. Back to you, Andrea.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The South winning the Civil War?
Yeah.
Didn't they do that in Twin Peaks? Remember when Audrey's father flipped out?
Yeah, but this actually is a little more real. I mean, it isn't just all a delusion and horn.
What are you implying? Are you implying Twin Peaks wasn't real?
I'm not going to say
Stop shattering my childhood.
Childhood? Twin Peaks is a year ago.
Yeah, well,
never
so
mind.
what
We
are
won't
you
pursue
saying?
this. Anyway.
And finally, we have Marc Macagnone, who returns with another look at the world of play-by-mail games.
Hello, I'm Marc Macagnone, and welcome to PBMs in Review. Today's review will be on a game called Land of Karis. This game takes place on a world much like our own, when it was young, green, and full of life. It has many types of terrains that must be overcome as you travel, mountains, deserts, waters, to name a few. As you're traveling, you'll be able to send out scouting parties, collect items, find mysterious structures, trade and buy things at the trading posts and with other players. There are 3 major types of beings on this world. Creations, the once dominant species before the off-worlders came. Muterians, mind-only creatures that take over anyone who gets near or careless. You Star Trek fans may be able to place these beings. And the Aki, very logical and intelligent beings who believe that they are the only ones this planet should bow to. There are other creatures to deal with as well, but the 3 I mentioned will be the races that the players will be using during the game. Mapping. Simple hexagonal mapping, giving the players free rein on which way they can travel. Trade. The trading posts that you will be able to buy and sell things for your people and for your alliances. You will also be able to trade between the alliances and other groups. Turn sheets. Very simple. Fill in the space. And of course, combat, where earth magic, science, and brute force combine to create the most bloodiest battles I've seen in PBM games. Each combat has 3 phases. Racial technique, where your group uses powers unique to their own particular race. Distance weapons, cannons, spears, bows and arrows, rocks, just about anything you could throw. And melee, where hand-to-hand combat occurs. You will set up your battle strategies and how many troops you will be sending into the combat. You will decide the type of weapons, magics, or forces used when you go into battle with your enemies. There are cults that you can join or create, artifacts to be collected and used, and quests. These are the important things, quests, to successfully complete, and the whole world to bring under your command. For the first-time PBMers, this game is for you. For you old-timers, this game is very interesting and enjoyable to play. You'll find a lot of secrets in this game, so look close and study the rules carefully. Now for my rating system. 1 for poor, a 5 for excellent. GM response, 5. Complexity, low to medium. Turn sheets, 4. Turn results, 5. Price, 5. There's so much activity and things happening in this game that's worth every penny that you pay for this game. And the fun index, 5. You'll be meeting a lot of interesting people and creatures. My overall rating for this game is 4.75. For further information, contact Paper Tigers, P.O. Box 1547, Glendora, California, 91740. Until next time, good gaming.
From 1961 to 1964, Marvel Comics, then called Atlas, had a tremendous outpouring of superhero titles. These characters, the Fantastic Four, Thor, the Hulk, Daredevil, were different from past costumed heroes. They were much more realistic in personality, anyhow, than their predecessors. The superhero books quickly supplanted the monster, mystery, science fiction, and horror titles that were Atlas's staple in the late 50s. The last issue of one such book, Amazing Fantasy, featured a character named Spider-Man by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. So popular was the character, who was in reality a nerdy teenager named Peter Parker, who gained great powers after being bitten by a radioactive spider, that he got his own book, The Amazing Spider-Man. This is a person for whom superpowers didn't necessarily improve things. Being Spider-Man caused as many problems as being a nerdy teenager. It was a situation many of Marvel's readers could empathize with. He quickly went on to become Marvel's most popular character. Today he is still the company's symbol and continues to enjoy immense popularity. He has 4 solo monthly titles, a number matched only by his de facto counterpart at DC, Superman. 3 animated series have been based on the character. He was a regular on the children's program The Electric Company. A live-action TV series starring Nicholas Hammond was made in the 1970s, and a movie directed by James Cameron is currently in the very early planning stages.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. Is he strong? Listen, bud, he's got radioactive blood. Can he swing from a thread? Take a look overhead. Hey there goes the Spider-Man. In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, well contained, he's ignored, action is his reward to him. Life is a great big hang up, wherever there's a hang up, you'll find the Spider-Man.
With me and Andrea to do whatever a spider can are, on Andrea's right, Jim Salicrup, who until very recently was the editor of the 4 Spider-Man books, and who was the person who launched the 4th title, Spider-Man. And on my left is Michael Fichera, a longtime Spider fan, one of the biggest Spider fans we've ever met, and who is also the person who designed that really neat computer-animated opening sequence that we debuted this year. Spider-Man was... part of the appeal of Spider-Man originally was the fact that he was like everybody else. He was like Marvel's readers. He was a teenager, and he had typical teenager problems. Now he's grown up, he's married to a very beautiful woman, he's got a relatively more successful career. Is that identification still there? And if not, what accounts for the character's continued popularity? Everybody wants to jump in first.
After you.
Well, I think Peter Parker still faces the same problems that he did back then. He still faces today, in just maybe a different light of being more mature. I think also the audience today is more mature, and it's an older audience they're hitting, so that they're facing more mature problems as he got older. I myself grew up with them, as you could well suspect, and back when I was growing up, his problems seemed to parallel my problems, and as I got older, they seemed to be still maturing with me. But still the same things, he's still the same person he was back then in terms of being human. His neuroses he still has problems, he's still ridden with guilt, his life is never easy for him. He's still one of us, and he's still very relatable.
He just puts on a funny suit every once in a while.
Yeah, well, so do I.
Right. But do you see that, I mean, the character has gained a lot more popularity in recent years. What do you think accounts? I mean, it's not like Batman where there was the thing with Frank Miller in the movie and everything else. There wasn't really any of the corresponding mainstream thing that sometimes comes along with popularity of the character.
Well, I think he's still the same character, like you pointed out, and we've brought back a lot of people who used to read it years ago, and they've come back. Some of them have grown up, have kids of their own. Their kids are reading it, so we got a lot of people who say, I remember when I was reading comics and I loved Spider-Man, now my kid loves Spider-Man, so I think the audience is growing, and there's a whole new generation of kids growing up now that are reading comics for the first time, that maybe they've never seen comic books before, maybe they saw the cartoons, maybe they picked up the Marvel trading cards and read about Spider-Man. Actually, even the Batman movie helped us, and that got people who probably weren't even aware of comics into comic book stores. And once they were in there, they saw what else was available, and I think we picked up a lot of people on Spider-Man.
Which leads, of course, to the next question. Do you happen to know anything about the so-called movie that's been planned for the last 15 years or so?
A little bit. I mean, I'm real happy about it. I mean, it's been officially announced that
Okay.
Jim Cameron is going to write, direct, and produce the Spider-Man movie. It's going to be a major motion picture for a change. It won't be something poorly done that winds up in a video store in a couple of weeks or something. So I think he's great. I think he's, I've loved all his movies. I think he understands the characters. He wants Stan Lee involved as a consultant. He said, Stan's the only guy he's going to listen to in regards to the movie. So I feel that's great. I was hoping for it.
I've heard rumors that he's going to be portrayed as a dark character in this movie. Is that necessarily true?
I haven't heard about that. I don't think it's up to the... I mean, over the years, there's been lots of scripts done. It went from a couple of different movie studios.
Yeah.
And at one point, there was even talk of a new TV series. And for some reason, some people, when they get an opportunity to do a TV series, maybe a studio hires them. They look at the material and say, oh, this is terrible. This is not good enough for TV. We'll fix it. And I had to read a bunch of those scripts, and maybe what they came up with would have been great TV shows by themselves, but it wasn't Spider-Man, which to me is like, why bother getting the rights to do a character if you're not going to do that character? The thing I'm happy about with Cameron is he wants to do a Spider-Man movie, and there's a lot you could do with Spider-Man. Within the 30 years Spider-Man's been around, there's been dark stories, there's been very upbeat stories, so whatever works best, whatever he thinks will make the greatest movie. I certainly have more respect for him than a lot of other people. He certainly knows a lot more about movies than I do.
Yeah, that was actually one of the problems with the 70s show with Nicholas Hammond. You lost that motivation. There was no Uncle Ben. That's like the primary motivating factor of Spider-Man was his Uncle Ben getting killed, and that motivated him to go off. That wasn't present in the series.
A lot more than that, too. You had no real personality. He wasn't really human. He was just kind of... He did his thing, he wore the costume, he went out and got the job done. There was no real worrying, there was no thought, there was no inner struggling, there was no motivation.
When Stan Lee would talk about superheroes before the Marvel version of superheroes, he would describe things, these characters that were one-dimensional, they'd go out and fight crime, it was very humdrum. So you can imagine how disappointed he was when they did a Spider-Man TV show, and that's exactly how they did it. It was lifeless, the characters were all there, but it was, pretty bad, basically. So, if nothing else, it's a safe bet to say the movie's going to be a lot better than the TV show.
Yeah.
You were the one who brought Todd McFarlane onto Spider-Man originally.
I happened to be there at the time when he showed up.
And now, he has had a tremendous effect on the way Spider-Man has been done, and in terms of the artwork. He's really had more influence than anybody since John Romita, really, in how it's worked. Do you see, as a fan, do you see his artistic influence, and purely the artwork, as positive, as working for the character?
Yes, definitely positive. Well, from a sales point of view, I'm sure it's positive. I've seen his cartoons everywhere. But I think that the comic needed maybe a little livening up in the years. Maybe just something new to add to the comic. And if rich detail and sticky, gooey webs was it, on removing his nose when he turns on a profile, fine. It's very animated, it's very alive, it's very eye-catching, it's very moving. It's almost like watching a movie when I read his artwork, when I read his comics. I think today's audience needs something a little more fast-paced, just where the movie industry needs something very fast-paced and very high in special effects. There's high special effects in the comic book world, and I think it's great.
Yeah, you notice that even Sal Buscema is drawing those little webs with the little things sticking out of them and everything, which he never used to do.
I'm doing it too.
Well, the problem with comic books in general is if you have a character that's been created 30 to 50 years ago, you have to maintain a lot of the elements that made him a success in the first place. Yet at the same time, you don't want it to look like, say, some of the old comic strips that look exactly like they did in 1930 or what have you. You want to make it look contemporary. So I think what Todd successfully did was take many of the elements that were successful in great Marvel comics in terms of the excitement of Jack Kirby, the dynamics or what have you. And Todd almost was basing a lot of his version of Spider-Man not on Steve Ditko's original drawings, but actually his memory of what they looked like. I mean, he wanted to make Spider-Man as spidery and as creepy and weird-looking as possible. And in other words, if you saw just a silhouette of any figure of Spider-Man by Todd, you know it was Spider-Man and not Captain America or, you know, Daredevil or any other character. And he just applied that thinking to every page he did. And he's really just incredibly creative and inventive, and sure enough, it got a lot of attention and people liked it. And it made sense to me when I was editing the books to mention it to the other artists, to say, hey, look what he's doing. And I like some sort of consistency. He's shooting webs in one book that are all gooey and sticky and spaghetti-like, or it made sense that they should look that way in all the other books.
You mentioned Daredevil. One thing that I noticed when I was reading up on a lot of Spider-Man to prepare for this is that some of what I think causes his popularity is just that he has these flaws. I mean, we were saying how he was human before, but I mean, a lot of the characters, you had the Goblin who was crazy, and you had the Daredevil who was blind, and you had Spider-Man who was always catching a cold. And
Not always. His Aunt May looks out for him.
well, yes, when he remembers to take his allergy pills, then he's okay.
Well, you know, he goes out in the winter with, like, his underwear, basically.
Yeah.
You're going to catch colds. But the whole thing about the human aspects of the characters, that lots of times characters change drastically, but people have a memory of a character that maybe it's from the first time they experience that character, and they think, well, nothing's happening, it's the same old stuff going on in Spider-Man. When I started editing the character, it got to the point where he wasn't in school anymore. He wasn't with Mary Jane anymore. He was very depressed. The book, I think, was a very depressing title in that every month he was trying to pay his rent. He'd have to go out, take photographs of himself as Spider-Man battling criminals, sell it to a publisher who hated Spider-Man, just so he'd make barely enough money to continue doing what he basically hated to do. I mean, he felt he was Spider-Man, no one appreciated him, why is he doing this? It was like, you know, give me a break. I felt, you know, in the span of a comic book character's life, I mean, 5 years is almost the blink of an eye, but I felt he needs a period here where things pick up a little bit. You know, I just don't think people want to see someone who's always, you know, having serious problems. I mean, you know, you have to be able to figure out how to pay your rent after a while, or, I mean, or at least come up with more interesting new problems. So what we did is we had a lot of things go well for him. He got married, he went back to school, even went back to his old costume. I thought even the black and white costume was a depressing or more sinister costume. So I wanted it to be more upbeat. And but at the same time, what was going on with the X-Men or the Punisher and all these other characters who were becoming darker and grimmer, and Spider-Man's not like that. When he's confronted with a bad guy, he doesn't pull out a giant gun and kill them. He still agonizes. His problems more grow out of the stories now. So in some ways, he's figured out how to pay his rent, but now he's worrying about, you know, making his marriage work. He's gone back into the science end of his Peter Parker life, where that I felt was important, is that's the one thing that's really Peter Parker. It's not because he got bit by a spider. It's like, this character can do this. And there's like all new avenues of, you know, this character's life to explore. So I'm hoping that these changes were positive and will do well. Who knows?
Did you have that problem with the black costume? Did you think it was depressing? Yeah. I always preferred the black costume.
See, a lot of people, when you started reading Spider-Man, which costume did he have?
It was the red and blue one, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the black and white one at least represented a change, that something was going on. And so what we tried to do to keep the black and white costume going was bring a villain in, because I thought it worked well as a costume. Had no problem with it as a costume, but I really thought it was more evil and sinister, so we felt a big, evil, sinister Spider-Man, which was Venom, would be the way around it.
I loved the change with the black costume. I thought it still maintained his personality and the character, and it was still him, and it was something completely new and different. The stories, however, were very depressing around then. Yeah. You know, it's kind of...
Well, also, I just felt...
Oh, wait, before we have to wrap it up. Okay. Before you get the steam going there, next week is our big slam bang
Holiday party.
Holiday party. Yes, we're going to have all sorts of incredible people. All of our guests from the last year have been invited back. We are also going to have an interview with Marion Zimmer Bradley of Darkover and Mr. Babylon fame, and all kinds of other neat stuff.
And we're going to have John Ordover and Don Keller. Okay.
Yes, a public debate between John Ordover and Don Keller, which ought to be very amusing.
Place your bets now.
Yes. And other stuff, including a Chronic Rift retrospective. We will see you then. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
And furthermore, I want to...
This episode was sponsored in part by Comics Interview, the magazine where both the fans and the pros turn to see who's who and how it's done. Read Comics Interview number 100 and see who the 100 most powerful people in the comics industry are. For a free catalog, write to Comics Interview, 234 Fifth Avenue, Suite 301, New York, New York, 10001. The Omega Zone, a store specializing in comic books and video movie rentals, including science fiction, horror, animation, and cult films you won't find at your local video store. Now at a new location, 258 West 15th Street, between 7th and 8th Avenues in Manhattan.
Applause Books, publishers of the newly released Terminator 2 Judgment Day movie book, written by T2 director James Cameron and co-scripter William Wisher. It contains over 700 photos from the film. You can learn more about the movie and see scenes that were cut from the film. You can find T2 Judgment Day at area bookstores or call Applause Books at 212-496-7511. Bain Books, publishers of this year's Hugo winner Lois McMaster Bujold, plus Anne McCaffrey, Elizabeth Moon, David Drake, Jerry Purnell, S.M. Sterling, Werner Vinge, and other writers of quality, fun fantasy and science fiction. Available at your local bookstore. Word Balloons, interviews with comics folk. A special video presentation hosted by the Chronic Rift's own Keith R.A. DeCandido, and featuring interviews with Gary Groff, Joe Duffy, Barry Allen Krause and Michael Luck, Terry Nantier, Denny O'Neill, and the Grandmaster himself, Will Eisner. This 1-hour special is now available on VHS videotape. For ordering information, write to Word Balloons, care of the Chronic Rift, P.O. Box 2224, New York, New York, 10185. 0023. This episode was also made possible in part through the very generous support of Marina France.